before, because I was hearing last night that YouTube, once again, is the bane of my existence. I can remember I spoke to a room full of, I had been invited one summer to speak to these foster grandparents in Orange County. It was a huge gathering. And then the following summer, they invited me again, and I thought, wow, why did they do that? And 2 years in a row. And so after the second time I had spoken, a foster grandmother came up to me, and I could tell she liked my talk. She had big tears in her eyes, and she grabbed both my hands, and she said, "I heard you last year. It never gets better." kind of hoping she misspoke. It's like a homie named Hector, who was 16 years old and finally had gotten back into school and a gang member and kind of a knucklehead. And he came into my office and he was trying his hand at small talk, and he said, "I ran into a man the other day who attended one of your talks." I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yes. He found your talk rather monotonous." Really? Well, no, actually that didn't happen, but I need practice using bigger words. I asked him to practice on somebody else. I was thinking that this breakfast is a little bit like what Martin Luther King used to say about church. It's not the place you've come to, it's the place you go from. And you go from here to do something very specific in Findlay. You go from here to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. You go from here to imagine a circle of compassion, and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. Honestly, you go from here to dismantle the barriers that exclude. That's what Welcome to a New Life is about. It's about broadening so that our view is more spacious of who belongs in this community, which is to say everybody. Everybody belongs. And so you go from here to stand at the margins, really, because that's the only way they ever get erased is by standing out at them. And you stand with a particularity. That's kind of what mentors do in this Hancock County, is that you stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, and you stand with those whose dignity has been denied, and you get to stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And wow, what a privilege to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. You get to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And you stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And so kinship is your goal, and I suspect if that remains your goal in this county, then we would no longer be promoting justice, we'd be celebrating it. And you brace yourselves, because you have to, as you stand at the margins as a mentor, because people are going to accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." And what mentors in Welcome to a New Life do for a living is that they allow other voices to get heard. And that is a prophetic and huge undertaking. So for 40 years, I've worked with gang members, I've walked with them, and the day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I'm closer to God than the thousands and thousands of gang members I've come to know in Los Angeles, where there are 120,000 gang members and 1,100 gangs. Wow. But that taught me everything of value. But, you know, in the last number of years, they taught me how to text, which I am so grateful because I find it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people. And I'm pretty good at it, you know, LOL and OMG and BTW. And the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh, hell no. And I've been using that constantly. And I know I can't be alone in being vexed by this autocorrect thing, you know. And, I remember I had a homegirl named Bertha, kind of a tough cookie, been to prison, drug dealer, and worked at Homeboy for a time. And she texted me on a Sunday and she said, where are you at? And I said, I am about to speak to a room full of molkas, meaning nuns, sisters, religious women. I'm about to speak to a room full of molkas. And I pushed send, and autocorrect told her that I was about to speak to a room full of ninjas, which she thought, you know, was pretty darn interesting. And even with the 3-hour time difference, even this morning, I can't even believe how early folks got up in California, Los Angeles. But, you know, they're always asking me for monetary assistance, you know, so it's like a light bill, or they're going to cut off this, or my rent. And a homie texted me once, and all he needed was $100 to finish off his rent. Well, I didn't have it. So I wrote him back simply, things are tight. And I pushed send, and autocorrect told him, thongs are tight. And he texted me back, sorry to hear that. What about my rent? Anyway, I told you all that to tell you this. So you know, at 10 minutes to 9 every morning, you know, from Monday to Friday, we have what we call morning meeting, and everybody gathers. We have 500 employees at Homeboy Industries. And so it's just packed. People are hanging off the stairwell, and you know, we sing happy birthday, we read the mission statement, we you know, make announcements, and somebody gives a thought for the day, and then there's a final prayer. So one day after the morning meeting, I grabbed two homies, Boncho and Manuel, who are older vatos who've been to prison, gang members, and I brought them with me to go give a talk at a high school in Palm Desert. So we're like 15 minutes on the road, and Manuel's in the front seat, and he gets an incoming text, and he chuckles to himself, and I said, well, what is it? He goes, oh, it's dumb, it's from Snoopy back at the office. Well, I just saw Snoopy. Snoopy gave me a big abrazo to begin the day, and Snoopy and Manuel work together in the clock-in room, where they clock in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rival enemy gang members. It's a tough job. I would not want it, because this may come as a surprise, but gang members can occasionally be attitudinal. So I say, so what did Snoopy say? Oh, it was dumb. Hang on, let me find it. Here it is. Hey dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up in county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now. Show them they got the wrong guy. Oh my God, I nearly drove into oncoming traffic. And then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot at each other, because I remember. But now they shoot text messages.
Wow.
And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them? How do we bridge the distance between us? Stan was mentioning about becoming friends, so it's not a kind of a relationship of superiority. It's what I would call exquisitely mutual. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend, and he was like the best listener I've ever been in the presence of. If you were having a conversation with him, he was laser beam focused. He was never looking over your shoulder to see if somebody more important was on the approach. But I remember a reporter had commented to him once, and he said, "Wow, these farm workers, they sure love you." And he shrugged and smiled and says, "The feeling's mutual." And that's the goal. You know, service is where you start. And God love you for service. But service is the hallway that leads to the ballroom, and the ballroom is the place of kinship and connection. Friendship. That's what you hope for. You know, you don't go to the margins to make a difference. Then it's about you. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different. And then it's about us. And that's how people mutually inhabit their own nobility and their own dignity. You know, at Homeboy Industries, you know, we get 10,000 folks a year who walk through our doors, and they're used to being watched, they always say, because they've been in prison. But they say, we're not used to being seen. And that's the key thing. The Buddhists say, "Oh, nobly born, remember who you really are." At Homeboy, we're allergic to the notion of holding the bar up and asking folks to measure up. Instead, we hold the mirror up and we tell people the truth, that they are exactly what God had in mind when God made them. And then you watch folks inhabit that truth. You watch them become that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. And no 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's huge. Well, Homeboy was born when I was the pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, Dolores Mission. And it was nestled in the middle of 2 public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. At the time, it was the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs in my parish in the housing projects, which is unheard of that you would have that many in housing projects. And so the LAPD called my parish the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in all of Los Angeles. So I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988. And last week, I buried my 256th, a young man named Nomar. Not all from that parish, obviously, but I know a lot of gang members. I get asked to do this. So first thing we did was we started a school because there were so many middle school, junior high age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them, so they were wreaking havoc in the projects in the middle of the day. You know, they were selling drugs, they were violent, they were writing on walls. So I walked out to them and I would kind of isolate them one at a time and I'd say, "Hey, you know, if I found a school that would take you, would you go?" And to my surprise, every single one said, "Yeah, you know, I would." And then I couldn't find a school that would take them, so they kind of forced my hand. So right across the street from the church was our parochial school, grades K to 8, that occupied the first 2 floors. But the entire 3rd floor of this huge concrete building was the convent where the ninjas lived. So one evening I gathered all the nuns together in the living room and I sat them down and I said, "Hey, you know, would you guys mind, you know, moving out and we could turn the convent into a school for gang members?" And they looked at each other and they went, "Sure." I mean, that was the extent of their whole discernment process. And so we were off and running, and gang members came in large numbers to the school. A very tough place. We had like 4 or 5 fights a day. I had one principal who lasted only one day. I called him the next day wondering where he was, and he had changed his number and apparently checked into a witness protection program. I mean, it was really tough. But in no time, they kept saying, "If only we had jobs." So myself and the women in the parish, the profile of the parishioner was really in the projects, women with children, hardly any men. So myself and the women, we marched around the factories that surrounded the housing projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers, you know, and that wasn't so forthcoming. So we just started things, you know, a landscaping crew, a maintenance crew, a crew to build our child care center, all made up of rival enemy gang members. And then in 1992, some of you might recall, in Los Angeles, after the acquittal of the 4 police officers in the beating of Rodney King, the entire city, every pocket of poverty exploded, except the poorest pocket, my parish. And so the LA Times wanted to know why that was, so they came and asked me questions. I said, well, I'm not sure exactly why we didn't ignite, but we do have 60 strategically hired rival gang members who have a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to gangbang the night before, and more to the point of your question, a reason not to torch their own community. So the article appeared the next day. Following day, I'm summoned to the Beverly Hills office of a movie producer named Ray Stark, who happened to have $500 million. And he calls me in and he says, how should I spend my money? And as I look back on it now, I can see that I woefully undershot my request. Young, I have hair, but anyway, I said, you know, across the street from our school is a bakery, abandoned, and you could buy it. It has ovens, they don't work, but you could fix them. I don't know, we could put hairnets on rival enemy gang members. They could bake bread. We could call it Homeboy Bakery. And that was the extent of my business plan. And so he said, sure. And so we're off and running. And you know, a month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, we changed our name. We had called ourselves Jobs for a Future. And we changed it to Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this. And not everything worked. You know, I'll be the first to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes.
I just read that yesterday. It was so funny.
And so, you know, we backed our way, we evolved our way, we into now becoming the largest gang intervention rehab program on our planet. So 10,000 folks a year walk through our doors. Everyone who comes through our doors comes barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace. And the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness. Every single one, man and woman, who walks through our doors comes with what psychologists would call a disorganized attachment. Mom was either frightened or frightening. And you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. Everyone who walks through those doors is seen. Oh, nobly born. Remember who you really are. And so you create a safe place. Welcome to a new life as a safe place. And once people feel safe, then they can feel seen. And after being seen, they can surrender to being cherished. If it's true that a traumatized person is likely to cause trauma, then it has to be equally true that a cherished person will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. I think that's the secret sauce. It's connection, it's relationship. But we talk about hope, and who are the delivery systems of hope? Well, everybody in this room. The poet says, hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, that sings the song without the words and never stops at all. And so you show up You sing the song without the words. You surrender to the exquisite mutuality of something wildly different. You're not fixing, you're not saving. You're walking with. You walk people home. And it's a gift, and it's a privilege. I was in Houston once, and I gave a talk, and afterwards a guy covered in tattoos who had been to prison, a gang member, and now he was what we call in the biz, a hardcore gang intervention worker, working in the streets of Houston. And he pleaded with me a little. He says, how do you reach them? Meaning gang members. And I found myself saying, well, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? And that's a whole other thing. You know, some of my senior staff will go, I don't know, I think I'm burning out. I guess I'm just too compassionate. I say, no, you've allowed this to become about you. It's not about you. Because then you're going to experience depletion, because then it's about success and what mentees go back to prison and which ones don't. No, it's not about you. It's not even about success. But if you can just delight in the person in front of you, if you can actually see them, then that's eternally replenishing and you'll never burn out. I learned that the hard way. But I learned it, and once I learned it, I can't unlearn it. I remember years ago, I knew a homie named Lulu. His name is Lewis, but we all called him Lulu. And he was a little gang member and sold drugs and sold crack cocaine in those days in the projects. And then he became his own best customer. And so I would say to him, hey Lulu, you need help, you need rehab. Oh no, I'm okay, until finally he knew he wasn't. And so he agreed to have me drive him to a rehab up on a mountain north of Los Angeles. And 30 days into his time there, his younger brother Eric did what gang members don't ever do, in my experience. He put a gun to his head and killed himself in front of his girlfriend. Gang members are more likely to put themselves in harm's way and go on a mission or a foray into enemy territory hoping to die, but they don't do that. So I called Lulu and I broke the news to him, and of course he was devastated. I said, look, I'm going to come pick you up for the funeral, but I'm going to drive you right back afterwards. And he says, I want you to. I like how recovery feels. So I go pick him up and big abrazo, and he gets in the car, and he launches right in. He says, last night I had a dream and you were in it. And in the dream, we'll say it's a room this size, but no lights, no illuminated exit signs, no windows, no light creeping under the door, pitch black. But he says, I know you're in the room with me somehow, even though we're not speaking. And suddenly, out of the darkness and the silence, I pull a flashlight out of my pocket and I aim it steadily on the light switch. And he tells me that in this dream, he knows he's the only one who can turn that light switch on. He's grateful that I happen to own a flashlight. So with great trepidation, he follows the steady beam of light until he gets to the light switch, and he takes a deep breath and he flips the light on. The room is flooded with light. And now he's sobbing in the telling of the story. And he says, the light is better than the darkness. Like he didn't know this to be the case. I've never had this experience in 69 years of living. I stopped trying to turn the light switch on for people. Stopped, dead in my tracks. I never returned to it again. And then you are resigned to the fact, sort of resigned, that it is enough for you mentors to own a flashlight. And that has to be enough for you, though you will be tempted to turn the light switch on for people. You can't do it. Plus it's crazy making. And then it's all about you. All good intentions. But this way you can know that it's enough to create a safe place where people are seen and then cherished. It's kind of a detour a little bit, but I have 5 sisters and 2 brothers, and since the pandemic, we gather once a month on a Zoom, and they're all married, and so it's a lot of faces. And so the other day it was the anniversary of my mom's death, and she died like a year into the Trump administration. It's my reference point, sorry, but and she was 92 years old. I had buried my father 25 years ago, and she died the way we all want to die, in your own bed, in your own home, surrounded by your kids, And she was sharp as a tack to the very end. In fact, during that last year of her life, she watched so much MSNBC, she was becoming Rachel Maddow, and she wasn't a lick afraid of dying, about a month before she died, she says, like, exhilarated and giddy. She said, "I've never done this before." It's like something you say just before skydiving. And in fact, the day before she died, I was alone in her room, which never happened because there were so many people. And it was just she and I was at the foot of her bed. She was asleep, and she woke up and she saw me there. And she said, "Oh, for crying out loud," and she went back to sleep. Well, she was pissed that she, hadn't died yet. Sorry. So, and then the next day at exactly noon, a bunch of my sisters went out to retrieve lunch or something, and again I was all alone. And right at noon, she lifted her head from the pillow and she opened her eyes, and she let out this wondrous, glorious gasp. Skydiving. And she left us. And nobody in earshot of that sound could ever be afraid of death again. But I remember in the last days of her life, there'd be 2 or 4 or all 8 of her kids surrounding her bed, and she'd be in and out of consciousness, and she would come to, and she'd lock onto just one of us, and she would look you in the eye, and she'd say with breathless delight, "You're here. You're here." And I think that's all you do as a mentor, is you look at people in the eye and you just say with breathless delight, "You're here. You're here." You don't have to fix them. You don't have to rescue them. You don't have to change them. All you have to do is say, "You're here, O nobly born. Remember who you really are." Like in the Christmas Carol, it says, "Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth." And yeah, it's about Jesus, and yeah, it's about Christmas, but how is it not the job description of every single one of you? You appear, and the soul feels its worth. Exactly right. And so this breakfast is not the place you come to, it's the place you go from. Another detour. I'm a Jesuit priest, like the Pope. I'm just saying. But the homies don't really know what a Jesuit is. But we always have, there are always like 3 of us who worked there for the last 35 years at any given time, and they don't really know about the Jesuits founded by St. Ignatius in 40. And so my office is a glass enclosed thing, and it's a huge headquarters in Chinatown, in Los Angeles, and I can look out onto the whole floor of the reception area, and all the chairs are always filled, and people are milling around, and from the 1,100 gangs in Los Angeles, enemies, everybody has multiple rivals that they have to work side by side, make croissants next to each other. And so I'm looking out to the whole floor, and I'm behind my desk, and I have 3 people in front of my desk, and we always have tours and I invite you to come for a tour. They give good tours, and the homies give the tours, and So it's like 8 tours a day from all over the world. People come to see Homeboy Industries. So I'm just talking to these people, and then all of a sudden a group of 20 parks right in front of my office, and it's one of those observe our founder in his natural habitat kinds of moments, you know. And so I kind of wave, you know, weekly, and then the guy giving the tour is Osvaldo, and he has what the homies call a loud-ass voice, and he's out there, and he goes, and this is Father Greg Boyle. He is the founder of Homeboy Industries. He is a jiu-jitsu priest. So from my desk, I kind of do some of the most unimpressive moves. So I tell you that to tell you this. On February 27th, 1544, St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, enters this word in his spiritual diary. And then he proceeds to use the word a lot for the remaining 12 years of his life until he died. And before he died, he went back through his spiritual journal, and he circles this word all the times that he used it. Now, I speak Spanish. I had never heard this word before. And the word is acatamiento. I know. I'd never heard of it either. I was looking at Carla's mom. Yeah, I'd never heard of it. Acatamiento. And it's a kind of, it comes from an archaic word, acatar, which means to look at something with attention. Acatamiento. And it's translated as affectionate awe, which I think is beautiful. And though I'm sure it was born of a mystical moment between Ignatius and the God who loves us without measure and without regret, certainly it was born from that. But he wanted it to become a stance. And I'm inviting you to allow it to become a movement. Affectionate awe. Which reminds me, in the Acts of the Apostles, there's this one odd line that says, and awe came upon everyone. And it suggests that the measure of health in any community at all, including here in Findlay, that the measure of health may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. And so you hold the mirror up and you say, you're exactly what God had in mind when God made you. But folks don't believe it because they are so stuck in images of shame and disgrace that keep them from seeing that truth. And how do you reach in? How do you dismantle those images? So many years ago, I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia, and it's what we call in the biz a gang in-service. I don't know if anybody have ever had to do something like this, but you get credits for it, and social workers commandeer hotel ballroom from 9 to 5, and they sign in and they get credits, and they have workshops and breakout sessions, keynotes, about why do kids join gangs, you know, and it's always the same, you know, crime is not committed by criminals, it's committed by these 3 buckets of situations, by a lethal absence of hope, people who can't imagine tomorrow, or by the traumatized and broken and damaged who can't find their way clear to transform their pain so they keep transmitting it, or the mentally ill, or combo worker of all 3. And so, you know, they come and they learn about why a young person might gravitate to a gang. That gangs are not the place, you know, people don't seek anything when they join them. They're always fleeing something. So I've done many of these. I figured I'd do a keynote. I said yes, and I bought my ticket to Richmond, Virginia. Well, a week before I was to fly, I pull out the original letter inviting me, and to my horror, I discover that I am to be the only speaker from 9 to 5 all damn day. And I said, oh hell no, I'm not going to. So I quickly grabbed two homies who were trainees, and so we have an 18-month training program. And so I picked two homies, Andre, an African American gang member, and Jose, and I sit them down, and they're like in their 9th month of their 18 months. And I said, look, you know, at the end of the week, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up in front of 600 social workers and tell your stories. Take your time. Because we got a long-ass day to fill. But I never heard their stories, and Jose gets up first, and he was probably like 25 years old at the time. Gang member, tattooed, shot caller, was in prison for a stretch. At that juncture, everybody has phases, and you're doing different things in our organization. We have 13 justice enterprises, bakery, restaurants, electronics, recycling, silk screening. And so, but at that juncture, he had kind of become a very valued member of our substance abuse team, a man solid in his own recovery. And now he's helping younger homies and homegirls with their addiction issues. And so not only gang member, shot caller, in prison, he also had a long stretch as homeless man, and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. And so he gets up in front of 600 social workers and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, you know, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6. When she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasped. And he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish. And we went from gasp to laugh. I'd never seen that before. And then he continued, he said, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California. And she walks me up to an orphanage and she knocks on the door, and the guy comes to the door and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days till my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school each day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through, and second t-shirt you could still see it. Finally, in the 3rd t-shirt you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion. And he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. Acatamiento, affectionate awe. To look with attention. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. Exquisite mutuality. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. I was talking to a friend the other day who works with homeless folks, and she said, people don't become homeless because they run out of money. They become homeless because they run out of relationships. And I thought, that's true at Homeboy. And that's true here in Findlay. That's what mentoring is. It's the relationship that heals. And all you're trying to do, which is huge and noble, is to make sure folks don't run out of relationships. All right, so I'm running out of steam, and this is cruel and unusual to keep you this long. So I'm just going to do one last story, and then invite Carl out there. You know, I've written three books, and my last book is called A Whole Language, and I was on a plane recently, and this is another digression, but I was returning to my seat from the restroom, and someone on the aisle had the tray table down and a book opened, and I went, whoa, and I recognized the color, which is a kind of a turquoise color. And I said, it's my book, somebody's reading my book. And so I started to walk by trying to be low pro, and the guy popped out. I believe he was drooling. So apparently reading my books is the next best thing to a CPAP machine. So, but anyway, I digress. But it occurs sometimes that to universities, in particular high schools sometimes, to force their students to read my books against their will. And I'm not complaining, but my alma mater, Gonzaga University in Spokane, who always ruins my bracket every year. Thank you very much. And so they had forced their incoming freshmen to read Tattoos on the Heart, and they said, could you come and could you bring two homies with you? And I do when people ask to bring homies. And I always pick homies in the same way, like those two guys with the trainees. I always pick enemies, rivals, just to force them to share a hotel room just to mess with them. And I always pick homies who've never flown before, just for the thrill of watching gang members panic in the sky. I remember years ago, a homie, older guy in the prison, and we were at the airport, and he said, hey, gee, are we flying Virgin Airlines because it's our first time? I said, yes, it's a requirement. We'll be coming home on American. So anyway, I picked two homies, Larry, an African-American gang member who worked in the bakery at the time, and Mario. And, you know, I've had a lot of trips lately everywhere, in New York and Albuquerque and Phoenix, and so I'm used to nervous first-time flyers. But this guy Mario, oh my God, he was just so panicky, and it was starting to freak me out a little bit. He was hyperventilating, which I'd never ever witnessed before. You know, he was like that, and we hadn't even boarded the plane yet. And so we're at Burbank Airport, which is kind of a smallish airport, and big planes, Southwest Airlines mainly, and you don't board the plane through that hermetically sealed chute. You walk out onto the tarmac, like you're the president, and you climb the stairs that lead to the front of the plane, and the big feature at Burbank is the stairs that lead to the back of the plane. And so I'm sitting there, Larry's off walking, exploring the airport, and I'm sitting there with Mario trying to calm him down. It's early morning, it's the first flight of the day, and so our flight crew arrives, and two female flight attendants, both of them with huge cups of Starbucks coffee. and they're schlepping up the front steps to board the plane. And Mario goes, "When are we going to board the plane?" I said, "Well, you know, as soon as they sober up the pilot." There they go now. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that. So, I should tell you that in our 35-year history, Mario is the most tattooed individual who's ever worked at Homeboy. Trust me, that's saying a lot. And he's all sleeved out all the way to his fingertips, neck blackened with the name of his gang, head shaved, covered in tattoos, forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids that say the end, so that, you know, when he's lying in his coffin, there will be no doubt, I guess, for anybody. And so I thought, well, I'm going to walk him in the airport. I don't know, maybe it'll calm him down. And I'd never been in public with him. Oh my God. People are like, oh, like this, and mothers are clutching their kids a little more closely. And thinking, wow, isn't that interesting? You know, because if you were to go to Homeboy tomorrow, walk up to anybody there and say, who's the kindest, most gentle soul who works here? They'd think for a beat, and then they'd say, Mario. Yeah, Mario. Mario is proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. He's proof that the only non-delusional response to everything is kindness. So we get to Gonzaga, there's a big Tuesday night talk, you know, it's like 1,000 people. But earlier in the day, that Tuesday, they don't tell you this beforehand, but you know, they'd like you to visit 93 classes. I mean, it's unbelievable. And I said, look, I'm not going to speak at any of these. I'm going to sit in the back of the classroom. You guys get up and tell your story. So they did, and very nervous, especially Mario, but they did a good job. Stories of terror and torture and violence and abuse of every imaginable kind. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance. Otherwise, you'd get scorched. I would not have survived a single day of either of their childhoods. Acatamiento. So the evening comes, and I coaxed the two of them to precede me, and so they each did 7 minutes each, basically their story they had told, and I got up and did my thing, and then I invited them to stand on either side of me for a Q&A, and yes, ma'am. And so a woman stands, and she says, yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario. First question out the gate. And Mario is this tall, skinny drink of water, and he's just terrified, and he grabs the microphone. Yes. And she says, well, Mario, you know, you say you're a father. You have a son and a daughter. They're about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? You know, what advice do you give them? And Mario clutches the microphone with great intensity. He's starting to tremble. He's getting a friggin' hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell he's going to say. And when suddenly he blurts out, as soon as he says those two words, he rushes back to his microphone, clutching, close-eyed, trembling refuge. And now I know he's losing the battle with his tears. But he wants to get the whole sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence. Until the woman stands, and now it's her turn to cry. Why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hands, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had returned him to himself. But make no doubt about it. Everybody standing had to return to themselves because it's mutual. Till you appear, and the soul feels its worth, singing the song without the words and never stopping at all. Don't think for a moment that this breakfast is the event you've come to. It was always going to be the place you go from. And you go from here to imagine a circle of compassion, and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. You go from here to dismantle the barriers that exclude. You go from here so people can be seen and then cherished. For systems change when people change, and people change when they are cherished. Till you appear. And soon enough you cease to care if anybody accuses you of wasting your time at the margins. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. Thank you for what you do.
What a powerful message. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I want to thank our sponsors, Mr. Thomas and Kathleen Donnell, Mr. Emil and Joyce Ziegler, Taylor Automotive, and then the Hancock County Convention and Visitors Bureau. This day would not be possible without them, and so thank you very much. We appreciate you guys. Also, you'll notice on your table the impact report for 2022. A lot of that information that Ryan Kidwell shared with us today is on that impact. There's also envelopes, and there's a QR code on the report. And of course, you notice on your table there's some Findlay Pieces chocolate. Everyone has to love that. I'm actually more excited that our logo is on it. So we are becoming big people now. So I'm pretty excited about that as well. I want to say thank you. Thank you for caring. Thank you for loving. Thank you for seeing. And as you mentioned, this is